Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to talk about building a speed system, and we'll talk a little bit about philosophy first. We'll talk a little bit about just conceptually what building a speed system might look like and some of the myths around speed training, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics. Should be about an hour, although I might go a little bit over. But let's get started. So first thing I want to talk about is that nothing that I'm presenting today is mine. Everything is borrowed from other people. So I put creative nothing, borrow of everything. I've had a ton of mentors over the past couple of years. I've had Dan Pass, Stu McMillan, Jonas, everybody that's contributed to this. Like, there's a huge part um, of what we do, which is borrowed from other people. So just want to make sure we highlight that. So if you have any questions on any of the slides that I have, I might send you to that person that created it. But yeah, let's get started. So I really don't like the beginning of podcasts. If you listen to my podcast, I might do like a minute about my story, but most of the time I try to just keep it high level. So I took this from University of Miami with Hero, Hardship, and Highlight. So I'll just quickly go through, and you'll learn a little bit about me, but I'll go through this real quick. So first is my hero. That's Kobe Bryant. And Kobe became my hero when I was like 14, 15 years old, when the Lakers were playing the Sixers in the finals. And Allen Iverson was my favorite player. And I'd never watched Kobe play because growing up on the East Coast, they don't play a lot of West Coast games. So never seen Kobe play, really heard his name, obviously, seen him in the All-Star game. I didn't really know how dangerous he was. And after watching that game, obviously he dropped like 40 on the last game, beat the Sixers in the finals, and Allen Iverson went home, and I became an instant Kobe fan just because the way he communicated, the way he competed, the way he played, like everything about him was, how I wanted to be as an athlete. In 2019, actually, really at the end of 2018, I got an opportunity to meet Kobe and present to him what I believed would be the next big wave in training. And I presented speed, and he loved it. And I got a chance to work with Kobe Bryant and the whole Mamba staff for a couple of years, and really just changed my life. So I went from hero to somebody I worked with to even bigger of a mentor role. My hardship, you guys probably know this by now if you've heard my story before, but I broke my femur in a car accident, 17 years old, fractured my femur down the middle, compound fracture. It was repaired with an 18-inch pole and two screws. So you can see the screw up in there. There's one at my hip and one at my knee. And if you're wondering, yes, I can go through airports without trouble. And I don't really have much pain. So I was very lucky to be able to walk again, to run again. And, if you know anything about my story, I was able to run track Division 1 and actually play rugby at a pretty high level after this accident. So a lot of what I teach comes from some of the pieces that I learned during that period and some of the things that I've taken away from it. So really, really, really important is that hardship. And then the last part is the highlight. This year I was able to train 38 guys for the NFL draft. 18 of those were drafted, and 6 of those were drafted in the first round. So it's a huge year. Don't plan on doing the same numbers this year just because I'm reducing size. But it was a year that I wanted to just make a wave in the industry and really prove, what we're doing from the speed point of view is impactful, and it worked. So this is my femur on the right side. There's a fracture. That was April 2007. January 2009, I ran for the first time. So about 18 months later. And then August 15, 2009, I actually walked on into a Division 1 track program. And, that gap in that time period is the basis of a lot of what I'm going to present, just about some of the myths, some of the misconceptions people have about speed, thinking like, man, I don't know if I can improve this thing. But going from this fracture on the right to the surgery to the point where I could run again really taught me that speed could be taught to really anybody, because I was wheelchair bound for months. So it changed my whole perspective on how to make people faster. So real quick, I want to talk about one of our favorite athletes right now. She's one of the fastest athletes in the world in her age group. And really, her program was like she was incubated for 9 months, and then she was trained for 2 years after. And we're pretty deep into our training program now. Like we're in the winter phase right now. But I want to show you guys this. Don't record any video here. This is pretty proprietary. But here we go. That's my daughter. I just threw that in there. But I don't know. She might be the fastest. Right now we got her at 5.3 miles per hour. I think she's probably closer to 6. So I have a GPS unit that we put in her diaper and have her run. So um, she's actually pretty quick though, and you can see that her shoes are actually on the wrong foot here. So maybe she'll be at 6 when she gets that right. All right, moving back into the presentation. So the first thing I'm gonna talk about is buy-in. So with buy-in, is one of the main things I want to focus on when we talk about speed training, because when we're speed training, it's not just us training the athletes. It's us communicating with other coaches. It's us communicating with parents. It's us communicating with all the stakeholders and people that might be involved in that journey. So we need buy-in. We need people to actually buy into the process. So what I call this period is the law of diffusion of innovation. Okay. So what this is about is getting buy-in. Right. So in the beginning, about 2.5% of the people that enter a space, so call it speed training, about 2.5% of those people are innovators. There's a guy named Lateef Thomas who just passed away last week, unfortunately, but he was one of the first people that I saw that were doing speed training, number one. And number two, he's one of the first internet marketers that I saw in the space. So he, had Google ads and keywords and all that stuff. And if you typed in speed training, Lateef Thomas popped up. Like, I was getting his email marketing, all those things that are pretty common now. Also, like innovators like Dan Path that were doing speed training, but before I was born, Charlie Francis. A lot of these guys took track concepts and then applied them to other sports, and like football, like soccer, like basketball, and became innovators. And the problem with being an innovator is that take a lot of the heat when things don't go perfect and when things go wrong. And a lot of these guys blazed the path for us. And right now, I think we're in this phase where we're in the yellow right here. We're early adopters. So all these people on the Zoom, all these people that are listening to this, like if you're hearing this, you're an early adopter because you're hearing about this before it's actually mainstream and popular. If you think about like the internet, for example, there was people that had websites on the internet very early. Um, there's people that believed in it, that built a model on it. I think Amazon built a model on the internet before the internet was actually really there. I mean, Jeff Bezos used to present his presentation on Amazon before people even had the internet, really. So he was a very early adopter in that space. The benefit is that if you think of like real estate and you get to a space and you get to an area that doesn't have much building and then you build on it, the value is going to grow, and your value is going to grow because you're going to own a piece of that early. So if you're into coaching and you're looking into speed, you're very, very, very early. It's like investing into Google in 1996, right? It's, man, what? Put $10 in, you might be a millionaire right now, right? But what we're missing is we're missing the early majority and the late majority, and that makes up the bulk of what's out there. This includes like people that aren't speed training now. It includes sport coaches that don't understand how to integrate this into practice. This includes athletic directors. This includes all different types of people that just aren't really into speed training yet. It's not a mainstream thing. Early majority right now, I think the biggest early majority is sport coaches or coaches that coach, soccer, basketball, football, that aren't really on the physical side. And that's not a bad thing. Like you definitely want coaches to be technically and tactically sound. I think understanding how speed plays into those things becomes really important. The late majority is, I think, more like athletic directors and organizational people, that it's going to take a little bit more time because they're further removed from the actual skill. And then the laggards, like by the time it gets to the last 16%, if you're in this space now, like you're doing well. Like you're very far into speed training, and your price is going to be up. So one person I want to highlight is Martin Luther King. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because when Martin Luther King was doing his speeches and asking all these people to show up, none of these people had social media. None of these people had Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube. All these people just kind of heard what was happening, and they showed up, and they showed up on time. So they showed up to DC for this speech. You could see everybody on the left in that crowd, and you see white people, you see black people, you see Republicans, you see Democrats, you see all different types of people showed up. And it wasn't because like it was a super planned event. It was because Martin Luther King was able to inspire people. He never gave a plan. He never said, "Hey, look, like, hey, we're gonna do this, and then this person's gonna run this." No, he gave inspiration. That was his currency. So all he really talked about was like, "I believe, I have a dream. Let's do this together." And everyone was like, "Yep, let's go. Let's do this." So the point is that he was able to speak across tons of different types of crowds. Like he was able to communicate his message to different archetypes of people, like white people, black people. Right now, if you look at our political landscape, how polarizing it is, right? Imagine it. Imagine having one leader that could draw a crowd like this and draw people from both sides in there without polarizing beliefs, and that's what happened. What happens now is that because our message is so complex, because our message is so detailed, because our message is so difficult to understand, it's hard to get buy-in from that late majority. It's tough to get the buy-in from the people that might actually make the financial or organizational decisions that are going to drive speed training. So we need to get to this point where we can have these conversations. So then I get into leaders versus those who lead. If you guys have ever watched Sing 2, like I've seen it probably 300 times because I have a 2-year-old. And essentially the story is really simple. It's a guy that has a dream of being like mainstream and big time in the theater space, and he's like trying to break in, and essentially like he finds his way in, gets funding, and starts working on this show. And in the show there's like obviously a big dance part to the it's a musical, so it's a big dance part to it. And this guy behind these words, his name is Claus, and Claus is a dance teacher, and he's probably the worst teacher I've ever seen. Like he's a leader because of his position. He's not a leader because he leads. So he's very abrasive. He says a lot of mean things to the people. Like he told one of the guys, like, "I wish you were not here today. I wish you were dead." Like there's a lot of things he said. He doesn't know how to lead. He just happens to be in a leadership position. And this is a lot of what happens in our space. We have coaches that are in leadership positions, but they're not necessarily able to lead. Right. So this is what it looks like right now. So if you're a sport coach, if you're, let's say, a head coach of a football team or a head coach of a soccer team, you have some type of opinion, you have some type of experience, you have some type of knowledge. Over that, there's probably some culture specific things like soccer coaches and soccer culture and football coaches and football culture. Like there's things that they've culturally been brought up in. Now, if you're in a professional or college team, there's probably a sports scientist, and sports scientist is going to communicate to the coach the data that is necessary for the coach to understand. So, how much distance did we cover? How fast was it? How many breaks did we take? How many collisions? Those types of things. Then you have the medical director that's going to be like, all right, this is the injury report. This is who we need to caution or red flag. Like you have a whole health side of it, return to play, all of that. And then you also have the media's influence on coaches. If you take, for example, NFL right now, there used to be a period before every game the players could go out in the field and do sprint training, or if they're developmental guys, they could run, they could do all these things before games. That's actually now taken away. NFL actually banned it mainly because of the public's perception of how the field conditions looked by kickoff. And if the field looked beat up, they were saying, "Oh, that's why there's so many injuries." Like, which there's not 100% truth to that. There's some truth to it, but the media has a huge influence on what the coach ends up doing, right? So when all these people, the media, the sports scientist, the medical director, they usually get to the point where they come to a conclusion of what's going to happen, and then they communicate that to the S&C coach, who becomes a secondary or tertiary role in this space. So the S&C coach or the speed coach or whoever else is under there, they have to come up with a training plan and training content based around all the other influences that just happened. So what happens is that they're kind of limited. So the time allocation has already been set. The daily schedule has already been set. The level of importance has already been set, and then they're told to come up with a training plan, training content, which makes it very, very, very difficult to execute, and actually really difficult to make a difference when it comes to winning games, which is the ultimate goal. So what I propose is that there needs to be a level of um, like equal across the board on all these things. So if you look at the three categories, like physical, technical, and tactical, the physical side is your S&C coach or sports scientist, could be your medical and PT as well in that. Your technical is like position coaches or skill coaches. Your tactical is coordinators and head coaches. Now, not one of these is more important than the other, although in the hierarchy of football, hierarchy of soccer, lacrosse, you definitely have higher importance because of salaries, because of um, just their influence on the game. But when it comes down to the actual game level, you need to have a combination of physical skills. So you need to be fast, strong, be able to decelerate, reaccelerate. You need to be healthy. From a technical standpoint, like if you're a basketball player, you need to be able to shoot. If you're a soccer player, you need to be able to kick. If you're a football player, you need to know your routes. Right. Then you have tactical, which is more game strategy. So I believe in a world where all three can communicate at the same level. It just takes the same language and it takes a little bit of effort. But when it comes to planning, all three need to be planned. So if I'm a head coach and I'm planning my practice and I'm looking at, okay, this is the scheme we're trying to run, or this is the play we're trying to run, we have to understand what are the technical skills and what are the physical capacities required to get there. Now, if I want to make someone faster, if my practice looks like a bunch of jogging, we're not necessarily going to get faster no matter how much speed work we do in the off season, no matter how much speed work we do before. That's going to negate the effort that the strength coach is doing. So we have to coordinate these efforts together. So in this tactical model, if our head coach is a marathon fan and has players do double or triple the amount of volume they see in a game, that doesn't necessarily make them resilient. That doesn't make them a better player. It doesn't help them actually play the game better. All the mental toughness stuff in the world doesn't actually negate the fact that the game looks like pretty much higher intensity um, than most practices. So if you can increase the intensity, if you increase the speeds in practice, you can make the game better, right? So I think the tactical model of how we organize practice needs to come from more than just a strength coach, more than just a speed coach. It needs a big collaboration between multiple people. So this is something we did with the University of Arizona this year. Um, this is a team that I think next year you're going to be very surprised by how good they are, and not just because of the transfer portal. I think because of the developmental aspects of what they're doing there. So what we created is a sheet that has this is the athlete management system that has all of our data in it. So it has our GPS data, has everything they do in practice, has every drill in there, has everything, every player, and we have reports weekly. So what we're able to see from this is that we could pick a single drill and we could see how much volume did they do, how fast was it, how many breaks did we take, how many collisions did we have. We could track these variables over time. So without getting too deep into like the nitty gritty, we're able to see how these players manage each phase of practice. So then we can decide, okay, we can make one part of practice more speed based, like we can make it faster. We can make it more deceleration based. We can do more braking. We could look at this data and decide, okay, we can do more here, pull back here, and then track that over time, right? Now, one of the things I think is a massive problem in our industry is that there's tons of myths about speed training, right? So what I just showed you with Arizona is that there's ways to make players faster all year. And I'll show you in a second how we did it even in season, right? But there's a ton of myths about how to make someone faster that kind of negate the facts or science about what actually happens on the field. So behind the words is a quick Google search of speed training. And if you Google search speed training, you're going to find a bunch of different things. You're going to find speed ladders. You're going to find certain like businesses that teach speed. You're going to find track. You're going to find lifting. But there's no like common voice on what speed training is, right? So what we are setting out to do is kind of disprove some of these myths first and educate and teach people, and then get into, okay, this is what you do. Okay, so this is a beeper. If you're under 25, you probably don't know what this is, but my dad had a beeper until like 3 years ago, right? And he's extremely stubborn as a human. But this is this is what um, our older generations use. Now there is no value in having a beeper in 2022 or 2023, right? It doesn't actually help you. Like if you don't know what a beeper is, like someone would ping your beeper, hey, this person called. You go to a payphone and then call, right? Obviously, you can use a cell phone to do that now, right? But there's people that are still stuck on to old things because that's how, maybe it was a certain part of their life that they were thriving in, or they did well in business. Like they hold on to things because of more of an emotional tie to that thing than it is actual use tie. And if you look at speed training now, a lot of coaches are like, hey, like back when I was speed training, this is what I did. So this is what you're gonna do. Right. And a lot of those myths prevail because of that. So one of those things is you can't teach speed. So, and I usually hear this from coaches that do 16 110s for speed work. So yes, you can teach speed, but the problem with teaching speed is that most of the coaches aren't doing things that are specific enough to speed training. So one example is 16 110s. Another example is a coach that does all technical work, a coach that does a bunch of drills, a coach that does just lifting, right? So you can teach speed, but it has to be specific. So Yuri Vershansky in the 1990s created dynamic correspondence. Essentially, there's 5 different categories of specificity of how closely related an exercise is to the actual goal of what they're trying to do. And if it's not specific enough, meaning it doesn't have 4 to 5 out of 5 of these things, there isn't a direct transfer. Now you can have a transfer, and maybe it's a secondary, tertiary transfer, but it's not a direct. So they are same muscle groups, same range of motion and direction of movement, same muscular contraction, same accentuated regions of force production, and magnitude and force and duration applied. So, for example, when I was coming up as a coach, everybody talked to me about the force index. And they said, if you can trap bar deadlift 3 times your body weight, 2.7 times your body weight, you're fast enough to run 4.4. Now, you can get kids to do that, right? And they're still not going to be fast, right? Now, the initial phase of them doing that block of training will make them faster because it's adding more force into the ground and it's allowing them to apply that force. But they get to a certain point where that no longer can get them faster. And there has to be other pieces of the puzzle that are more specific once they get past that phase. So is the force index a real thing? Yes, it is a real thing. It's a thing, and it's one of the many things that it takes to run fast, right? It's one of the strength buckets that we need to run fast, but it's not everything. Okay. So the next thing is, if we need to at least sprint 1 time per week, right? That's literally one thing that I ask athletes all the time is that, like, when's the last time you sprinted full speed? And like, well, we had practice and it was fast. I'm like, no, when's the last time you went out and tried to run your fastest? And most athletes that I've talked to, even in high school, haven't done enough sprinting and like fast sprinting. And we'll talk about this in a second about how it's actually injury risk if you don't. And if you do too much of it, it's a danger zone. But typically, what I found is people aren't doing enough. Okay. Now, no time. A lot of coaches say, well, we don't have enough time to run fast. Like, we have an hour session, which means that 15 minutes warm up, 45 session. Where are we going to do speed? And I say, well, you do have time because you can achieve it in 5 to 15 minutes in a warm up. But there's 3 categories that are really important when it comes to developing speed. First category is physical development. So physical development is where you can put the force index in, trap bar deadlift. It's power, it's strength, it's reactivity. Those are physical things that can be worked worked away from the field, maybe in the gym, maybe in jumps, maybe in something else, loaded jumps, right? Then you have technical. So technical is like cueing to help athletes understand context. Hey Drew, can you mute everyone?
Yeah, there we go. All right, you're good.
Cool. So technical is technical cueing to help athletes understand. So that's your A series, your B series, your C series, your dribbles, everything technical. And stimulus means the right dosages at the right times. So think about like if I give you like 15 minutes in a session, are you going to do just a bunch of A skips and B skips? Probably not. We may not do that at all. Are we going to do physical? We can. We can do some physical things, but most of the time is going to be spent on getting the right stimulus. If I want to run faster, I need to run fast. So that is the number one priority. Now, if I have extra time, you could put into the warm up more technical stuff, more physical stuff, right? But a goal would be to develop technically over time, right? Get the right stimulus often, very often, and then work on the physical qualities as well, right? So here's an example what we did with the University of Arizona in season. Our linebackers, receivers, defensive backs, running backs, and quarterbacks all improved their speed. Our D line, tight end, O line did not improve their speed, but they were still hitting above 90% of their max. Obviously, D line, offensive line, tight end had less exposure to high speeds. So it would make sense that they wouldn't improve. But all the skill and the big skill positions were able to run faster, even in season, right? Now, while doing that, our workloads increased. So how much work we did per minute increased over the whole season. And if you looked at any other team, I would say the trend line might be the other direction. Also, our high speed efforts increased. So they're doing more work, they're doing faster work, right? And then also our speeds increased. So our speed, our actual max speed increased over time throughout the season. And then our sprint distance, how far we ran, increased, right? Now, the way we individualize this approach, I'm going to get into maybe on another webinar, but we had a plan for how we did it, right? So I'm just going to skip past that one. Another thing we did was look at the accel and decel management. So we looked at how many accelerations are guys doing, how much distance are they doing in each acceleration and deceleration, because this would tell us a lot about how fatiguing some of the practices were, right? So these things were giving us insights into, all right, players actually can get faster during the season, right? As long as we manage these qualities. Okay. I'm going to come back to this. Okay. The next thing we looked at is what actually transfers to getting someone faster, right? So if you look at heavy squatting, which is what I was told to do when I was in high school, heavy squatting directly translates to the first 5 meters of my sprint, the beginning of my sprint. And this is a visual from Alvaro Meal, Derek Hansen, and Carl Val. So heavy squatting had a very high transfer to how I moved at the beginning of my run. Okay, Olympic lifting had a heavy transfer to the beginning, mainly because of my extension qualities. 5 to 10 had medium, 10 to 20 low, and then almost nothing after that. Explosive jumping, high in the first 10 meters, medium in the next 10 meters, and then low after that. Medicine ball throws, medium across, and then none after 30. Plyos, it was very high from 5 to 20 meters, 5 to 30 meters, and then kind of died off after that. Resisted sprinting, high in the beginning, very beginning, the first 20 meters, and pure sprinting affected everything. So from this, we can say like, all right, coaches that only focus on lifting to get faster. Yes, you can get faster, especially in the beginning part of a run. Will it affect your max velocity? Probably not. Or guys that just do medicine ball throws. Oh, okay, cool. Well, that'll affect your speed, but only in specific areas. Guys that are plyo heavy, right? So the point is that it takes an approach where all these things are present the whole time. You can't just pick one category and say, I'm going to get faster using this. You have to have things that transfer, and things that directly transfer are going to look a little bit different, right? So the number one thing is that we want to develop technique, obviously for high speed sprinting, which will take time. Number two thing is we want to train at or around or above maximal velocity. And then we need to test and record changes to maximal velocity. Now, how I improve my maximum velocity isn't just running fast. You have to have this list of things in there as well. You do need to lift, you do need to squat, you do need to do medicine ball throws if you want to improve certain qualities that are going to aid in how you accelerate to that speed. Okay. Another one is, if you don't use it, do you lose it? So the aerobic system, if you're doing like a bunch of aerobic 5K stuff, it takes 30 days plus or minus 5 to detrain from that quality. The anaerobic system is 18 plus or minus 5 days. Maximal strength, 30 plus or minus 5 days. Strength endurance, 15 plus or minus 5 days. But maximal speed is 5 plus or minus 3 days, which means that every week, if I don't touch max velocity, my max velocity will actually start to decline. So my motor control, my neuromuscular function, and my phosphocreatine storage all will reduce. So every 5 plus or minus 3 days, that means it could be every 3 days, it could be every 8 days, but at least once a week, I have to touch on that quality. Now, if I look at it from a physical standpoint, like in season, every team understands that lifting is important. Now, maximal strength isn't important every week, but they do touch qualities that are close to maximal strength nearly on a weekly basis, right? They do some type of strength endurance work. They do some type of anaerobic work, some type of aerobic work. But very rarely do teams prioritize the last piece, which is maximal speed. So if I look at the lowest hanging fruit, a head coach can make players faster just by allowing them to reach maximal speed once a week. Okay, a lot of coaches say, hey, don't we get enough speed stimulus in practice? And my answer is typically no. But the reason why that's important is that running at 85% velocity and running 92% velocity are very different, right? Especially when it comes to a stimulus in their hamstrings and you talk about vaccines. But from a neuromuscular standpoint, from a central nervous system standpoint, 85% is not intense enough to create a positive adaptation, a positive change. So if you look at segments like 10 yards, we're looking at 82 to 86% of their max speed. This is all from Ken Clark. 15 yards, 89 to 92%, and 20 yards, 93 to 96. Obviously, this changes significantly depending on the position. So if they're linemen, those numbers could be higher at 10 yards, right, than it is for a skill player. But typically, players aren't getting into that 15 to 20-yard range of maximal sprinting to get that stimulus, to get that tick over to the next box, right? So they're not getting enough in practice. And we've done a ton of studies with high schools, even in colleges, even in pros, and looking at their practices and them thinking it's high speeds, but because of rest periods or because of distances allowed to accelerate or sprint, they haven't actually reached those above 90% qualities. Okay. Now, one of the last things here is that a lot of coaches think they can't change technique, right? And I sometimes am in that category depending on when and where in the season, um, we're applying a speed training. But Jordan Mendeguccia, Jonas Dodu, there's a couple other people that did a study for 6 weeks. And what they did is they took a test group that they did a bunch of technical work with, along with the physical work. And the other group, the control group, just did the physical work. And what happened is the test group actually improved the contact time, the touchdown distance, so how close they touch down relative to their center of mass, thigh angular velocities, how fast they move their legs through the air and switch, and their top speed improved 0.44 meters per second, which is like 1 mile per hour. Whereas the control group really had very little change, and all the changes were negative. So what that means is that, yes, physical work will keep you close to your max speed, but you need some of that technical cueing and coaching, which is why you can't just automate speed. You can't just say, hey, like a robot could run speed. Like, you still need some type of intervention, some type of coaching to help the athletes get to the actual optimal positions to run fast. Okay. So time needs to be invested into figuring out what change is necessary or favorable rather than jumping to a predetermined movement template. So what that means is that I can't just say, hey, everybody, here's a speed training thing. Everybody do the same thing. We have to understand what change is necessary or favorable. Maybe that's based on the sport. Maybe that's based on strengths and weaknesses. Maybe that's based on positions, right? But we have to find some type of way to create more of an individual plan or program for the athlete. Okay. So all these athletes here are high level. either college or professional. Austin Eckler's in there. They're all 20, 19 through 22 years old. I think here one of the baseball players is younger, but they've all been sprinting with this specific strategy since they were young, but they're still very dysfunctional. And it's interesting because if you find athletes that are baseball players and you watch them throw or watch them hit, it's very rare that you're going to find massive dysfunction in how those guys do their skill. They've all practiced it so much that it becomes like they're very high level and efficient at it. But when it comes to sprinting, it's kind of the opposite. They're very few guys that we found that are efficient and effective, or bulletproof in how they sprint. So we've obviously been sprinting for a long time. And when we were, you know, early humans, there wasn't like a speed coach. It's like, hey guys, like you need to go eat. Like I'm gonna teach you how to run so you can eat better. Like no, the environment and hunting dictated their ability, and natural selection allowed the males that had the best ability to continue to thrive and have more kids, and boom, 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 and all of a sudden we adapted. But when it comes to sprinting, when I say sprinting, I mean like very, very, very high speeds. We're actually pretty poor compared to other animals. Um, Over certain distances, like we're actually better than any um, any animal on the planet, to be honest. But when it comes to short sprinting, like that's not what we were designed to do. We weren't designed to maximally sprint to a top speed to catch our prey. We're actually built for covering long distances, stalking and hunting our prey over days. Um, and sprinting is a quality that therefore needs to be developed, and it needs to be taught, and it needs to be understood by people before they get into it. Now, if I had a son, I have a daughter, but if I had a son, this is how I think he would look. So I just put that there. But if I took him to golf lessons and he's 5, right? It's probably the first time he's ever done it. So there's a good chance that all this is brand new to him. All this is brand new. And the benefit of it being brand new is that his perspective on it is going to be wide open. He's going to get exponentially better. Now, if I took my son to running lessons at 5, my son's been running before. He's been sprinting a little bit before. So he's going to be like, I already have a strategy of how I do this, right? And he's going to have to relearn and undo some of those things. So what we call that is motor learning. So every athlete comes to me at this point of the year and they're 21, 22 years old, and they're getting ready to make way more money than I may ever make. And they probably actually now with the NIL and all this crazy stuff, like most of them are way more financially set than I am, right? These guys have millions of dollars, coming out of college, right? So they have this perceived ability, which we call autonomy. So they think, oh no, I've already sprinted before. I'm pretty good at it. It's made me millions of dollars, right? My job is to tell them you're actually not as good as you think at this, right? And here's what you need to fix. It becomes cognitive very fast. And in that process of making it cognitive, they actually get worse. So they actually go from being very, very, very good at something to being a beginner relatively quickly. And what happens is that when they get in those phases, they work through the kinks and they're slower because they're thinking. Sprinting is a very hindbrained activity. Like if you looked at brain patterns when you're running full speed, there should be very little, right? So it's very hard to think and run because it happens at 5 strides per second, right? Now, what happens is over time you get to the associative phase, so you actually get better. So you actually start to get to the point where you understand, all right, I need to do this and not that. That was a good rep, that was a bad rep, right? We get to associative, and then we get a new ability and become autonomous again. Now, the thing about this is that every year it looks like this, and it trends down and then it trends back up before we get to the season. And we have guys now that have, they're on year 10, year 11, year 12. And literally since I started coaching, some of those guys are still around. And we go through this every year. They're like, okay, what do I need to work on this year? So it doesn't stop, and no one's perfect at it. Like Usain Bolt had a coach, right? And he's the fastest human on earth. Okay, but one of the big issues is that there's a lot of inputs to the athletes. So they're told so many things in high school, like run on your toes, speed is a genetic thing, focus on your stride length or focus on your stride frequency, only lift, just run track, build your technique, reach out the lower leg. Like they're taught all these things, and a lot of them are BS, to be honest. And what happens is you end up with something that looks like this, right? And people are calling this speed training. It's just a lot, right? It people call this speed training, and it's not. This does not make you faster. I'm sorry, it does not. It's complex, and it does not actually get the job done. Okay. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this and I'm passionate about it and I care about it is that when I looked at data from 2021, the differences between the first round draft pick and the undrafted guy were about 0.12 to 0.15 seconds. And some of them were even bigger and inside linebackers and tight ends. So 0.15 second difference in a 40-yard dash could be worth millions of dollars. And I was in charge of that process. So if I didn't perform, and I have had guys that don't perform, like nobody's perfect. Every single guy in the industry has had some athlete that didn't respond. There's millions of dollars that athlete lost, and they got to live with that. And you got to take responsibility for it. So what I started to do is say, hey, look, I'm not about to be on the other end of that. Maybe one every 200 guys is going to have a bad performance. I'm okay with that. But I need to be damn near perfect. I need to understand, what do I need to do to make sure that all my guys end up in the right draft position based around how they run. If I have only one thing I can influence how many millions of dollars this athlete can make right out the gate. And that's my responsibility. So this past year, we had 3 facilities we worked with. 18 guys were drafted, 6 in the first round. Okay. Our changes happened pretty aggressive. So average change in miles per hour is 1.28 miles per hour. We reduced the time to peak velocity by 2%, which means that they reach peak velocity sooner. We increased the distance that they reach max velocity further. So they not only hit top speed sooner, but the distance that they got to top speed was further. If that doesn't make sense, just think about it. Okay, 11 inches on broad jump. The exit angle, basically their torso exit angle was improved by 5% or two degrees. All right. We took a guy like Desmond Ritter that was projected a 4.81. He ran a 4.52. His mile per hour increased from 20.4 to 22.1. Right. Now, the reason why this is important, I'm not here just trying to brag about the things we did last year. It's that everybody's program was individual to what they needed at the time. And obviously we have the resources and the time to do this during combine training. It's not something you could do with 200, 300 players, but you can understand the needs of the player, the position, or maybe some of their genetic makeup of what they're good at to start making some changes that are more individual, right? So what I'm going to talk about now is just a little bit about the stride cycle, and then we'll talk about how to actually implement all this into a session, into a block of training. Okay, so the stride cycle can be very complex because each part of the stride cycle influences another, right? So there's air variables, what happens in the air, and there's what happens in the ground. So going from left to right, I'll make it very simple. The first thing that's important is how much range of motion they have between their thighs. Okay, the second thing is how fast their legs can switch from that peak direction, so the full flexion, full extension, and then how quickly can that switch back down towards the ground. Okay, now on the ground, we have to make sure that we have a stiff ankle. Okay, when we hit the ground, our hip doesn't drop. We create a huge force in the ground, and then we displace our body forward. Okay, that's the entire stride cycle. Okay, now I want to credit Alan Murdoch and Speedworks for this. I added a little bit to it, but mainly they're visual. Okay, so we'll start with what happens in the air. Right, the first thing that happens in the air is you create a big split between your thighs. Okay, now if I take that split, I can look at front side range of motion. I can look at back side range of motion. When I was in college, they told me backside is not important. That is a lie. Okay, backside is incredibly important. Okay, backside is the propulsive quality that you need. You don't want too much backside. You don't want to be too far backside. All right. Now, front side, we were taught 90 degrees in the front. Okay, this is one of the best sprinters in the world. And you can see here, it's not 90 degrees in the front. It's about 72 degrees, right? 90 is not necessary, right? We want to create horizontal range of motion, not vertical range of motion. Vertical range of motion means we're running up and down. Horizontal means that we're actually getting propulsion and moving forward, right? Now, getting these types of numbers aren't very hard. You could use on form. It's not difficult to get. We're working on something that might actually get this even faster, right? Now, when I look at how someone runs, the first thing I want to look at, maybe I'm individualizing or deciding what they should do, is I want to look at their total range of motion. I want to see how much of that's directed front side. So top left, he's got good front side or poor front side, but he's got very good total range of motion, which means that he probably has too much backside. Okay, top right, good front side, good total. Bottom right, good front side, poor total, meaning he doesn't have enough propulsion with the back leg. And then my guy Marquise on the left, on the bottom, has poor front side and poor total. Okay, so just looking at this one metric, I can decide, okay, does my athlete need more ISOs, range of motion type stuff, or do we need to figure out if they need more front side, right? Or are we doing too much in the back? Okay, very simple. Okay, sorry, I missed that one. So here's the easy one to look at here. Boom, front side, total range, easy, okay? The next we're gonna look at is thigh angular velocity. So in thigh angular velocity, we're looking at how quickly the thighs will switch back under the body, right? So if you see on the left here, good range, on the right here, good range. Now the thing I'm looking for here is how quickly that leg can come back under the body. Now, if that takes a long time, it's poor thigh angular velocity. It's poor reversal, okay? I'm gonna play this here. Let's look at the right first. So he's able to get a huge range and somehow swing that leg back under his body, okay, very aggressively. Okay, so he's got a great range. He swings the leg down. His thighs are switching midair. They're scissoring back under the body. It's really good, okay? Now, if I look at the other one on this side, he's got great range. But when it comes to getting that thigh back under his body, his legs are not switching. He's just falling towards the ground. And when you fall towards the ground, it creates a break initially on contact. So he's got great range, but then he creates a huge break on the ground, right? And then he's got to start all over again and trying to get that leg to produce a propulsion forward. Okay, so that's thigh angular velocity. Okay, now whip from the hip is very similar, but what we're looking at is that hip to create this whip down towards the ground. So everything's initiating from the hip. Can it drive that thigh back under the body to get it down? Okay, so it's a very aggressive reversal, but it's all focused on the hip swinging down. If athletes don't have this, they're not going to be effective when they run. Okay. Now the next thing is looking at pretension. So are they pointing their toe down when they're going into the ground? Are they pointing it down? Are they pretense? Is their calf stretched already? Are they looking at a dorsiflexed ankle? Really simple. Every coach knows dorsiflexion at this point. Okay. Now, what happens on the ground? Okay. So what we look at on the ground is the first thing we look at is stiffness. Does the athlete drop their hip on contact? Now, in order to run fast, you have to have some type of spring, right? So you can't land straight leg and try to move forward. You have to have some type of compression and then extension. Okay, so these are not bad. This is good. This is probably a little bit too much. But the good thing I like about this is that their other thigh is already coming forward, right? So they created this four. Whereas on these two, these are poor stiffness and the thigh is late. So you can see the knee when they're side by side. You can see the foot is pointing up towards the ground versus having this 90-degree here, right? And you see all this bending happening here. Okay, that's poor stiffness. So if you watch it in real motion, he lands bent, and then you see the hip drop even more to compress to get them forward. Okay. All right, we're almost done here. Okay, the next thing we'll look at is ground reaction force. So um, there's huge debates online talking about what's more important, vertical or horizontal. Not going to have that debate. In acceleration, in the first step, horizontal is higher than vertical if you sprint correctly. Um, and that is a very important thing to understand. But after that, it is primarily vertical. Now, what's important is that you will have some horizontal force vector the whole acceleration phase. And why that's important is that you don't want to just go strictly vertical, meaning like if I train just weight room, I need to train the vector of horizontal. The way we do that is resisted running. Okay, very simply, we implement resisted running. It helps work that that horizontal vector of force production. Okay, now if you look at force over time, right? So if I look at how much force I produce in what time frame, the athletes that produce a higher force in a shorter time frame are able to attack from above. So you look at the bottom on the left in the vertical force quadrant, athletes that can attack from above, meaning their thighs traveling and accelerating downwards from the top, can produce a very high spike in their force early on in the first half of that sprint, first half of that foot contact on the ground. Now, the second half in average and very good runners kind of looks the same, right? It's not much difference. The first half is the most important, right? So you look at now in the middle at the top, you look at 5 meters per second, it's going to look the same. 7 meters per second, you start to see it translate a little bit. And then top speed, if top speed is going to be higher if they're able to produce a higher peak early in the first part of contact, and then the back half is actually the same on both athletes, right? They might have a very similar back half of their contact, right? But the first half is the most important. Okay, so very quickly, I'm gonna go through a proposed model. I think I'm already over time, but you guys waited for me patiently, so I'm gonna dive in. Um, what I think is that the coach is in charge. Like, I'm saying coach, I'm saying physical development coaches, because we understand it can be in every single room. It could be in the medical room, it could be in the strength coach room, it could be in the sport coach room, we could be with the player. We spend the most time with the athletes. All right. So what I think is each coach needs to produce a community. And in that community, you might have 4 or 5 individual sports, which is fine. But the thing that is the most common between every sport is speed. And if you're a swimmer, I'm still saying the same thing. If you're a wrestler, I'm still saying the same thing. Speed is a quality that is very similar to how strength became like a very, very, very popular thing. And a lot of it came from weightlifting and powerlifting. And we implemented it into our sports. Sports got better. Now I'm proposing the same thing for speed. I think it's driven from the coach and creating this community that it has athletes from all over and all different types of sports join these communities. Okay, I showed you what we did with Arizona. We had 31 new top speeds in season. Okay, 20 athletes above 100% of their off-season max, and a plus zero point 0.8 miles per hour on athletes who PR'd. So basically, every starter improved. Okay. Now, out of that, and the reason why I'm saying this is that like most people are like, well, is it gonna work? It's gonna work, right? Out of that group, not only did everybody improve, but there's a 35% reduction in time lost and games lost. 35% reduction in time lost and games lost. So time lost is the amount of days listed as out on the injury report. Okay, 114 days in the season, 109 players, X amount of days. So it's 714 moments divided by 12,426 equals 5.7%, meaning that the availability level of the players in season was 94.3%. Okay, now games lost is the amount of games listed as out on the game day injury report. 94.5% availability, a 35% reduction. One of the only changes outside of what the medical team did, and they did an amazing job, is that we sprinted. Okay, so sprinting became a vaccine. Okay, so step one, we need to make speed a habit. Okay, that's one of the things that I look at when I look all across the industry, is that speed is something that we do in the off season or do it late off season, or it's part of the periodization scheme. No, we got to make this thing a habit. Okay, so we when you look at what challenges you face, I just did this presentation last week. Coaches were saying buy-in from the head coach, buy-in from the players, buy-in from, okay, I understand that. We just went over buy-in. We have to make it a part of it, and we could do it very simply in a very short amount of time. You get the athletes to sprint 2 runs per week, you're doing something positive, right? So this kind of negates that. Okay, number 2, we have to make it attractive. We have to make it fun. We have to make it sexy. Okay. The way we do that at Arizona is you post the speeds every week, right? So here's each game week. Here's each player in the receiving group. Here's how fast they ran that week, right? These are things that the players need to see. Post it. Man, you beat me this week. Yeah, I got you next week, right? Make it competitive, right? So our way of doing that is universal speed rating, right? So we've made it sexy. We made it, black and red and all this cool stuff. Like it, but we're able to quantify and gamify the process so athletes can go see their data and compete against each other, right? We made it a game, right? You have to make it a game. And if you build a community and you have all these players and athletes, you not only do you want to be the best coach in your community, but you want to be able to gamify it for the athletes so they're competing against each other and competing against athletes outside of that community, right? Now here's an example from House of Athlete. All right, they have this posted in their facility. They scan the QR code, they input their 40 or their miles per hour, and then they start their competition, right? So they're able to start competing right away, right? And then every single week at House of Athlete, athletes sprint. Not only do they sprint, but they're able to compete against other communities, right? So if you want to go compete against House of Athlete and you create a community, you could see what those guys are doing. You could see how much faster they're getting. You could start to join that same process. Okay. Here's an example of what it looks like. So this is a fake page. We worked with US Soccer. It's not the real data, but here's a community. Okay. It's all the players, USR, their rank, their age, their program that they're doing. You can look at just highest estimated miles per hour. You can look at their miles per hour over time, right? You could see it's your chance to create a dashboard for your athletes, right? You can see how much faster are they getting over time. Okay. All right. Step 3, make it easy. It's got to be simple. If it's not simple, they're not going to do it. Okay. So that's where I came up with measure, automate, and optimize. And I came up with this when my daughter was born and I wanted to spend more time with her. I didn't want to be working 90 hours a week and not, getting a chance to put her to sleep or take her to school or pick her up from school. You have to measure what's important, right? Then you have to automate that measurement, make it simple, right? You don't, if you're a coach and you're the head coach, have an intern or someone else run the test, automate it, make it simple. Okay, then optimize it, make it better every year, right? Add different technologies. Go from GPS to the next thing. Go from laser to GPS. Go from GPS to 1080. Like find a way to optimize what you're doing and get better data. Okay. Right. So the easiest way to do that is just using max speed to start. Okay. So what we did at Arizona is percent of max velocity, right? Trying to get 100% or better. We have the off-season speed, you have the in-season speed. You're trying to beat your off-season speed in season. We did it in 18 minutes. 18 minutes once a week, right? You can get faster. Okay. This is the first view that I created for universal speed rating in 2020. And I was like coming up with this idea, like, man, if we just had everybody competing on how fast they are, we could change the world. And this is the first mock-up. All right. Now it's changed a little bit since then, but this is really what it is. It's built around a Z-score. So it tells you how fast you are relative to your position, or not position, sorry, your sport, your region, and your age, right? It has your history, it has your historical score, right? So you can enter this competition immediately. Okay. In 2021, I had 3 goals. I wanted to communicate my vision of what the previous slide looked like to the team. 2, I wanted to make the product better. And 3, I wanted to provide a framework to create the plan. And then when I was thinking about it, I was like, who's our target? Whoever our target is, we need to educate. So what we did over the past year and a half was spend all of our energy and effort on education to get people into the mix. Now we're at the point now where it's like, okay, people are educated that speed is important. Now let's start competing. Let's see who's actually a really good coach. Let's see who's actually got fast athletes. Let's find objective measures to measure those things to get people inspired to want to get better. Okay. I mentioned before Jeff Bezos, he would finish his presentation and ask, what's the internet? And the reason why I put this here is that there's an opportunity in this. I'm telling you right now, it's like imagine me in 1996 being like, yo guys, the internet's going to be the biggest thing. And people are like, I don't know. Well, what if you were one of those people that bought up some websites or real estate on the internet? Or what if you were one of those people that developed the internet-based company back then? You'd probably be a billionaire and not on this, right? So what I'm saying now is that like this is the new wave in sports, and it's going to take over because it's universal, and it's not something that's individual to soccer, individual to basketball, individual to football. It covers every sport and every athlete that plays any sport. Cross country, yes. Swimming, yes. Bowling, yes. There is speed that is going to help every single sport. And what we're doing now is we're giving coaches the opportunity to be the early people in that space and take that space and buy up athletes and basically have athletes that are nationwide or worldwide that are in their community and competing against each other. And that's where we really want to focus on, is getting coaches that feel confident enough to compete at that level, which is why we're doing education and programming. Okay. That's all we got right now. We're headed in this direction where we'll have, right now you can get a GPS and get all your data. We'll have some updates on this coming out soon. So essentially where it's going to get to, this is an original mock-up, but athlete will sign up. They can get a GPS device. They can train, practice, and play, get live data, upload their data, and then they can compete at that level. So they can just play a game and see how fast they play that game. And we want to make it simple. We want to make it easy. That's what's coming next, is athletes are going to be able to actually get their data in real time from games and training sessions and practices. And it'll have their, their volume, it'll have their intensity, it'll have their monitoring systems. But the future is that every athlete would just go outside and do their thing, and all their data will upload, and they will see how fast they were. So that's really it, guys. I appreciate the time. I wonder if is there any questions, or Drew, you want me to keep going? I kind of went over time.
I don't think we have, it was a little bit over an hour. So maybe a few questions. Let's do a few questions, and then we'll call it a day. And like I said, everyone will get the recording. So let's see. If you have a question, please send it in the chat, and we'll do probably like 2 or 3 of them. We'll give it a second here for questions.
Dalton said, what is my approach to the weight room side? So I believe on the weight room side, we should basically marry up our qualities that we're trying to improve. So if you're trying to improve max strength, that goes very well with acceleration. If you're trying to improve max speed, that goes very well with like more speed strength qualities. So when you make a session and you make a plan for the week, you're trying to marry up all the qualities together. So you put those together. So what we use right now, we do a lot of velocity-based training. We do a lot of velocity-based zones. So when we're working max strength, we're using a velocity zone, maybe 0.4 to 0.6, right? And we're using speed strength, we might do 0.8 to 0.1 to 1, right? So we're trying to marry up those qualities and work on nervous system qualities more from a physical standpoint. And obviously you have like, you can have your bilateral, unilateral lifts, you can have your posterior stuff. Like it's not super complicated in what we do it and how we do it, but I think we'll have more coming out soon about that.
Les, I see a good one from Shane. He asked, coming back from off season, would you start with conditioning for a couple of weeks before adding top speed running?
No, I would not. I would start by integrating all the qualities you need to integrate all at once. But I would have different percentages of those qualities. So if you look at, I would start with the game. So you look at your game, and let's say your game, you cover 5,000 yards, right? And in those 5,000 yards, 200 of those yards are high speed. And you also have acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, right? And it happens with, let's say, every 45 seconds. So you know that that's what you're training for. You work backwards from there. And you start to say, okay, I need to develop speed to be able to do that speed over the course of 200 yards, right? I need to be able, not all at once, but like need to be able to run a high speed distance around this, or I need to be able to decelerate this many times. you start looking at training your off season, you start looking at how do I bleed 50% of those qualities in now, and all of those things. So not just conditioning and then speed and then this. You don't need to build a base. Your base is your speed. So you keep running and maybe shorten the distances, shorten the intensities, but you or volumes, but you have a aspect of what you're going to do in the game always. Okay.
Let's do.
John's John said, from a rugby standpoint, would you suggest a different workload based on the season if you're in 15s versus sevens? Yeah, always start with the game. So the sevens game is 7-minute halves. You have 3 games a day. So that means, what does that tell you? You're going to have a lot of high speed running, a lot of open space. You're going to have a lot of, I would say, like maybe you would have only 5, 6 sprints a game that are like high speed. And you'll have X amount of volume. So work backwards from there. Now from 15s, the density is higher. It's 80-minute games. A lot of high speed, excels and decels, but maybe not high speed running, like top end speed. We have more collisions. So training for that is going to be significantly different because you're preparing for a short area battle versus a long speed battle. Andrew said, "Are we designing our own GPS unit or joining with the current GPS company?" We're not designing our own GPS unit, but we will be coming out with a very, very, very cool product with another company that will allow people to have GPS and train and practice and play. Let's see, one more. 18 minutes to run a session at U of A. How is that structured or formatted in conjunction with practice? We did 4 resisted runs a week. That was it. Now practice was fast, and we had to make sure practice was fast. So if practice doesn't hit the required intensities, then you have to do a supplemental speed training. The goal is not to do any supplemental speed training in season outside of resisted running. And resisted running is really to increase their ability to accelerate to high speeds. So it's not built to maximize their high velocity stuff. We're hoping that practice maximizes their velocity stuff. How much volume per session per week depends. I'll get to that. I'll have more on that later. What feedback, if any, are you giving technique in those condensed 0? I work in Chicago with winter upon us. Any suggested drills for max speed when working in a small space, 15 yards or max? Look at that chart from Alvaro Meal. So you can do other qualities. You could do plyos, you can do repeat jumps, you could do, you could turn a tread, make it a dead mill and run on it, like basically take the belt off and just, or get a treadmill from Tony Villani. That's another one. But there are ways. You look at the physical qualities that it takes to run fast, you can develop it indoors in 15 yards very easily. How do you individualize speed training needs in a group setting, specifically in the private sector? Test, assess, and program. What is your test? Your test has to be something that tells you where they're deficient in their acceleration first. So is it early, is it late, or is it high velocity? That's force velocity. Second, do load velocity profiling. 4 runs, you'll find a trend line, and you'll see which bucket the athletes fit in. And then third, program. So make it heavy, medium, light, and then go from there. That's the easiest way I can think of it, but that's a longer answer, and we got a ton of resources on that. Can I get some info on how to properly use Stat Sport GPS and how it links with USR? We'll send you an email. Thank you for your podcast. You were mentioned tweet about force velocity profile in my sprint. Do you use it with your athletes? We used to, but now we do it through GPS. But that's a very, very good resource for sure. Very good resource.
I think that's
I hit everything pretty much.
Awesome. This was the select group of 100 that were able to make it. So thanks for doing that, guys. And we'll send the recording out probably by end of day today, as well as the presentation. And then Les mentioned it, but we did just release his podcast. So make sure to check that out. Spotify, Apple. As you guys witnessed, he does like to talk. So in the podcast, he does that each episode. So, but yeah, thank you, everyone. And thank you to Volt for sponsoring. And if you haven't checked out Volt, go check that out too. Any last words?
No, that's it. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks, guys.